Hi everyone, and welcome to our lecture on fungi. As always, make sure you read the chapter content about fungi, as the PowerPoint will only cover some main highlights, and make sure you get most of your study material from our textbook. We will cover the fungi kingdom in this lecture. So here we see our phylogenetic tree that we've been working with for the last couple of weeks. We covered the prokaryote life a couple of weeks ago. That included domain bacteria and domain archaea. And also it spans all three domains. So microbes are present in the three domains of life. And the eukaryotic microbes, if you recall, are the protists, which are what I am checking off right now. And the last three domains of life are in kingdoms of life, are in domain eukarya, and they are the plants, animals, and fungi. So right off the bat, we can see that the majority of life on Earth is some sort of microbe. Microbes span all of the domains, and there is an incredible abundance. But for the last couple weeks of class, we will finish up the rest of the life in this tree. Fungi, of course, are eukaryotes, meaning they have nuclei in their cells and other membrane-bound organelles. Most are multicellular, okay, and there are really a couple of examples of the single-celled fungi, but the majority, probably 90% plus, are going to be multicellular. So for a broad definition, you could say they are mostly multicellular eukaryotes that have cell walls of chitin and that are decomposers. We will go over their unique body structure and their unique reproductive cycle. And just keep in mind that while they are decomposers, that's a more general term for the scientific definition. So they are technically what we call heterotrophic saprovores, which means they obtain nutrients from dead or decaying matter, which is a decomposer. This is just our technical term here. Just like our bacteria friends that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, the entire Earth system would collapse without fungi, especially life on land. So they, along with the bacteria and the archaea we looked at, are the decomposers of the ecosystem. And what that means is that they are able to unlock nutrients, essential nutrients, from dead organisms and recycle it back into the soil for the current plants to utilize, and so to continue the circle of life. They are not only essential decomposers, but they actually form a marriage relationship or a symbiotic relationship with plant roots, and we call that relationship mycorrhiza. We'll take a closer look at that in a little bit. But essentially, the fungi will break down nutrients for the plant, and then the plant can feed the fungi sugar. So both organisms benefit, and it's even thought that plants would not be able to survive on land without the fungi's help. So again, incredibly important function there. And of course, fungi can be eaten and used in the food industry, and we'll take a look at some of those examples as well. So their nutrition. They are considered heterotrophs because they don't make their own food, but they're a little different than we are, for example. So humans are also heterotrophs. We need to eat food. But instead of ingesting our food and digesting it internally, they will secrete digestive enzymes onto the dead or decaying matter. It'll break down outside of their bodies, and then they will reabsorb it that way. So different mode, but they're heterotrophs nonetheless. And if you recall the technical type of heterotroph they are They are heterotrophic saprovores, which is just a fancy term for decomposer. The basic fungal structure. Now, I'm going to use a basidiomycete, which is a type of mushrooming fungus. So there were the 5 phyla of fungi that we saw in the previous couple of slides. Make sure you know the 5 phyla and be able to give me an example of a representative. But since the mushroom is probably the most recognizable type of fungus, we will just go with the structure of a mushroom as our fungus example. And unless it is a single-celled fungi, most fungi will have about the same type of structure. So the bodies of most fungi are constructed of thread-like filaments that we call hyphae. So as you can see here in the example, individual strands, okay, and these are actually many cells joined together. The individual strand is the hyphae. There are cell walls present, and that material is made of a protein called chitin. So I would be able to distinguish that out of a lineup. Different than the cell walls of prokaryotes and plants. So one way that we can characterize organisms is whether they have a cell wall or not, and if they do, what is it made of? Because it's going to be distinct for different life forms. So for the fungi, yes, they do have a cell wall, and it's made of chitin. And if you recall the previous lecture, if we're talking about a bacteria, yes, they do have cell walls, and it is made of peptidoglycan. And then next week when we look at plants, they definitely have cell walls, and it's made of cellulose. So again, I would be able to associate the material making the cell walls with each of these organisms as well. Individual hyphae will aggregate together and form the vast network that is the organism itself. And we call the sum total of the hyphae mycelium. And hyphae can stretch for miles and miles underground. And so fungi can be some of the largest and oldest organisms on Earth because the mycelium of the organism can stretch 10 and 20 mile across. And that's pretty big if you think about it. How they reproduce. So again, we're just going to go with the mushroom, which is a basidiomycete, or in the phylum of the club fungi. The mushroom itself is the reproductive structure of that fungus. So remember, most of the organism is underground in the form of mycelium. But when it is time for that organism to reproduce, that hyphae will band together to form the fruiting structure that we know as a mushroom. And on the gills, on the underside of the cap, the cells will undergo meiosis and produce spores, which are asexual reproductive cells. Those spores can then be carried away from that fruiting body by wind or water or animals. And when that spore lands on a favorable environment, it can then germinate into a new organism. Fungi don't have male and female per se. We use plus strands and minus strands to differentiate between different sexual types in the hyphae, but for our class, we don't need to get into all the nuances. I just wanted to point that out in case you were wondering what this plus and minus was. It can't, I guess for us, you can think of it as male and female, although it's not quite that. The commercial uses of fungi. So, of course, they are used for food and the food industry, and also really significant medicines. So, as well as their incredibly important ecological impact as decomposers and as the mycorrhizae component of that plant root fungi relationship, we can eat them. So we can forage for mushrooms. We use fungi in the production of cheese. So if you've ever had a blue cheese before, all of that blue veining is a type of mold, which is a fungi. Yeast that we use in baking and brewing is a type of fungi. And we can also derive extremely important medications. So some of our most valuable antibiotics, like penicillin, is derived from the mold Penicillium, which is a type of fungi. So just to recap, okay, ecological impact, we went over that they are decomposers and what that means. However, not all fungi are the good guys. There are some type of pathogenic fungi, and a pathogen is any organism that causes disease. So these are often parasites, and a parasite is where one organism benefits and one organism is harmed. Okay, so we have another type of relationship here, a positive, negative one. If we are infected with a parasitic fungi, that fungi is living on and in our bodies, absorbing nutrients from our cells. And about a third of all fungi are parasitic, so a very significant number. Some examples of parasitic fungi in humans are athlete's foot, so the fungus Tinea pedis will sort of grow in and among the skin of your feet and feed off of that. If you've ever heard of ringworm, that's actually not a worm. It's a type of dermatitis fungus that will grow on your skin. Jock itch, yeast infections, scalp ringworm. So all of these fungal infections that can cause systemic disease or body-wide disease would be good examples of parasitic fungi. Another really interesting example of a parasitic fungus is called ergot. And ergot, as I will outline right here, is a type of fungi that feeds off of rye and wheat grains, so food sources for humans. And so its taxonomic name is Claviceps purpurea. And if you were to harvest that grain infected with claviceps, it will induce a physiological response. So there are chemicals in this fungus similar to the chemicals in the psilocybin mushroom or the magic mushrooms. And it can either make you sick, like poison you, hemorrhage, give you fever, upset stomach, or it can cause auditory, visual hallucinations, spasms, convulsions. And upon looking at this phenomenon and backdating weather patterns in early America, there have been really interesting theories to support that ergot poisoning was the root cause of the Salem witch trials. And if you've ever heard of the Salem witch trials, back in the 1600s, puritanical religion really ruled America. And if you did not adhere to the religious and social customs of the day, you were often deemed a heretic and a witch. And so it was one specific summer, like one or two summers in the 1600s in New England, America, primarily Salem, Massachusetts, I believe, where a lot of people started acting really strange one year. They would convulse, they would shake, they would say weird things, they would say they were hearing and seeing weird things. And of course, when people saw them behaving strangely, they attributed that behavior to them performing witchcraft. And so they were often burned at the stake or drowned or killed in some other horrendous manner. And for a long time, it was a mystery as to what happened because that only lasted about a year and it never really occurred again. And so scientists wondered what was causing these people to act so strangely for them to be accused of witchcraft. And it turns out that that year in particular was extremely wet and warm, which is the perfect environment for ergot to thrive. And so it was proposed that the Salem witch trials were actually caused by this ergot poisoning that happened way back in the 1600s.